Welcome back to Lettermen Row. It's tight ends week. Andy Backstrom, middle of your screen. Tim May, down in North Carolina on the other end of your screen. I am just Spencer Holbrook. We're going to talk Ohio State tight ends. Andy, no Cade Stover, no problem? Or maybe there is a problem. I don't know. What do you think? G. Scott, Will Kazmarek, Jelani Thurman, Bennett Christian, and a couple other guys. How do you feel about this room? The state of the room, I guess, for you, Andy. I'll go to you first.
I feel like tight ends usually fly under the radar just because with Ohio State, you think about the wide receivers, you think about the quarterbacks, especially this year, you think about the running backs, and everyone wants to talk about the offensive line. Is it going to be good enough? But the tight ends, yeah, there's a lot of question marks there. Who's going to be the guy after Cade Stover? I've noticed with Keenan Bailey now in his second year as tight ends coach, there's an uptick in intensity that he has, his approach day in, day out at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. I remember at the spring we got to talk to him. He barely had a voice left because he was shouting so much in practice. He's a charismatic guy, really good with the players, but typically with us media, a little bit more joyful, I would say, in media sessions. And he just was super intense when we got to meet with him in spring ball. And I think he's trying to convey that to his team and his unit there, that he's trying to build out, guys that really don't have much experience in game. And he wants to see who can rise up and kind of take hold of tight end one and probably tight end two, because with Chip Kelly as offensive coordinator, we're going to see a lot of 2 tight end, 3 tight end sets. But of course, that depends on how good these tight ends are.
Tim?
Yeah, I agree with everything that Andy Backstrom just said. Could be considered a tight end guru based on his insight. I do believe it is G. Scott Jr.'s time to step up, and he's already the leader of the room, but to step up and be maybe the leader on the field. I know it's going to be, the big knock on G. Scott Jr. has always been he's a converted wide receiver who is a good receiver, good catcher of the ball, but has he gotten big enough and strong enough, et cetera, to block? I thought he proved himself last year in quite a few appearances that his blocking many times was on point. And I think, if anything, he's going to be better at that. And then you throw in the Will Kazmarek transfer from good old Ohio University, what he brings. I think some people might have, Spencer, you and I have talked about that. I mean, some people kind of like short shrift a guy when he's transferring up from a MAC school, but Will Kazmarek appears to be the real deal as far as Ohio State is concerned. And of course, everybody knows who pays attention to these videos what a fan, if that's the correct term, what a fan I am of Jelani Thurman in terms of potential. And so I think they've got a really interesting mix there. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I think there's 5 guys in this room who I know there's 5 guys in this room, but I think there's 5 and potentially even 6 guys in this room who could legitimately play for Ohio State. When you add in Patrick Gerd, who we've seen play, and quite frankly was just flat out the second tight end against Rutgers when Cade Stover went down. It wasn't Jelani Thurman. It was Patrick Gerd, the walk-on,
right,
as just a tight end. He didn't even play fullback. He was just the tight end, along with G. Scott. And then you throw in the true freshman, Max LeBlanc, who he's only been there for a couple weeks, but I've heard some folks rave about him already, that he looks, the part. He's ready. I think truthfully, Bennett Christian did silver line himself into potential playing time this year by going against Jack and JT last year on every snap as a scout team guy when he was suspended for a banned substance. Because instead of being the third string tight end, roughing up on the scout team defensive ends, he had to be the scout team tight end because he couldn't play. So he was going against Jack Sawyer and JT Tuimoloau and blitzing linebackers at all times against the best defense in the country. And so there is a lot of talent in this room. And I don't know, this is a Moneyball approach, almost like we talked about last week, Andy, with wide receivers. You're not going to replace Marvin Harrison Jr. 1 for 1, but you're going to replace him in the aggregate. I think it's the exact same thing with tight ends. I don't know if you're going to have 600 receiving yards from tight ends this year. I don't know if you're going to have one guy step up and replace Cade Stover the way that he did, the way that he was able to produce for the Buckeyes. But if you replace him in the aggregate and you get 4 or 5, maybe even 6 guys to do it, and you get a little bit more 12 personnel and you see some new stuff with the tight ends. I wrote about that at Lettermen Row Wednesday. Like, Andy, this has the potential to maybe be a better all-around room this year than it was last year, even if you don't have that top guy in Cade Stover that you came to rely on.
Yeah, and honestly, maybe it's a better situation to be in. You hate to lose that production, but you don't want guys being tired out fatigue-wise in a longer season that could go 16, 17 games. Also, health-wise, injury concerns are always there. And we really just don't know how hurt Cade Stover ever really was at Ohio State, because he played through pretty much everything he could play through, even playing a little bit in the Cotton Bowl when pretty much everyone told him not to for his NFL draft prospects, but he decided to give it a go anyway. And so I think, he played more than 600 snaps each of the last 2 years. We know that Keenan Bailey wants to kind of distribute that better among his tight end unit and not necessarily have one guy being, totally the lion's share of the workload. And I think that's a way to reduce injuries, reduce fatigue, and again, a potentially longer season. And so you go down the board, and as you said, Spencer, there's a lot of different candidates that could take up those snaps. And like we talked about in the opening, there could be a lot of 12 personnel at play. We know Ryan Day likes to do that in his system. So really you're talking about not only who is the starting tight end, but really who are the top 2 tight ends. That's the way I always look at it with this Ohio State offense. And, Keenan Bailey doesn't care about if you're, a walk-on, or in Patrick Gird's case, a son of a legacy, or even if you're a top-rated recruit like Max LeBlanc was just outside the top 100, or top 200. He cares about who's going to perform best. And so all these guys are in play. And I think training camp is really just going to come down to who's going to earn those snaps.
Tim?
Yeah, of course it is. And I just wish, as we break down these positions and stuff, but what's the most intriguing thing to me, I know who the top receivers are. And I know they're going to throw to them this year. I know who the top 2 running backs are, plus probably the third running back. I know who those guys are. They're going to use them a lot in this new system. But the wild card for me, and, it's the best way of summing up what a tight end is anymore in major college football, is I'm not really sure what Chip Kelly is going to do from the standpoint of the complement of talent he's got available and what he's going to run offensively on wherever you want to call it, a consistent basis. And I think the tight ends are the real question mark in that regard. Is he going to get into 2 a lot? Can he get into 2 a lot? Does he feel like he can get into 2 a lot? But then is he going to throw to these guys? Are they going to try to run the ball down people's throats inside and out? Or are they going to, with this fleet of wide receivers, what are they going to do? And it just seems like the tight ends, as much as you'd like to see them use the tight end more in the passing game, as in throwing the ball to them, I'm just trying to wrap my head around whether that's actually going to be the case, because I really don't think it's going to be, because how can you leave three, possibly 4 big time, possibly 5 big time wide receivers on the shelf just to throw the ball to the tight ends 4 or 5 times a game? I don't think that's going to happen, except for maybe, we always see the tight ends get wide open in big games. Everybody goes to that, but I'm just talking about it on a regular basis. I'm just curious to see where this Chip Kelly led offense is going to go in that regard. And I think the guys who may pay the price in terms of production, as in catching and running with the ball, could be the tight ends. Now watch against Akron, they'll have 15 catches combined and 300 yards. But I think that's the real conundrum right here.
It's interesting, Tim, that you bring that up, because during running backs week 2 weeks ago, we hammered home the idea of 2 running backs being really good for Ohio State, because what we saw with Chip Kelly in 2021 at UCLA, when Zach Charbonnet was a stud, and behind him, I believe, is Britton Brown was the second running back, a stud, and they ran those guys really well. Justin Fry was the offensive coordinator. Chip Kelly was the head coach. Sound familiar to you guys? Chip Kelly, kind of the head coach of the offense at this point. Justin Fry, his right-hand man at that offensive line coach. And in that same 2021 season, if we're going to talk about it with running backs, we have to talk about it with wide receivers. Greg Dulcich, who's now with the Denver Broncos, had 42 catches for 725 yards and 5 touchdowns. Like, that is real, like, game-changing production from the number 1 tight end in a Chip Kelly offense. Like, that is a thing that can happen. And I don't know if they have a tight end who can put those numbers up. I think G. Scott's a good receiver. I don't think he's 700 yards. He's a 700-yard receiver, and I'd be happy to be proven wrong, because I think G's a great guy and a great and can be a good player. Is Will Kasmerick a 700-yard guy? No, absolutely not. But if you are throwing to Jelani Thurman and a couple times to Will Kasmerick and enough to G. Scott, you might end up with 42 catches for 725 yards and 5 touchdowns to the tight ends. That's not going to surprise me at all. And so I think the 2021 UCLA team is such an interesting case study for this Ohio State roster because running quarterback, check. 2 running backs, check. Wide receiver core, I don't think we can quite compare them. Yeah, I'll get to you, Tim, in just a second. And then the tight ends, like Greg Dulcich was the guy. And so I just think that it's interesting, like you do that comparison.
Yeah.
Tim.
Yeah. And that's what you just made the point. You just made the point. Dulcich was the guy. I mean, you're talking about Carnell Tate, Jeremiah Smith, Emeka Egbuka, and whoever emerges as that next guy that you're going to see a lot of in the wide receiver core. And as we talked about ad nauseum about the running backs in this group, Quinshon Judkins can catch the ball out of the backfield. Travion Henderson, we know, can catch the ball out of the backfield. That just, to me, when I put those numbers together and put Chip Kelly, I know Chip Kelly's mind's working a mile a minute because he changes almost every year in some form or fashion. He's like a chameleon based on the strength he has on hand. And anybody can look at this team and see the strength they've got at the running backs and at the wide receivers. And then you go into the tight ends almost become not forgotten, but they become a major source of torque, for want of another term, when you want to mix the run and the pass. And, we'll see where it goes. I'm just as curious as anybody to see it get going.
Andy?
Well, I think, a big reason why you can have those multiple tight end sets is not necessarily because you want to throw to either one or two of them. It's just that you need more power in the run game. And you can get really creative with how you motion those guys pre-snap and what you do to build some space in the running lanes. So I think that, for me, is what I think of. It's not how many receptions are these guys going to have. It's how can they be used in the blocking game? Maybe who are the best blockers? We've heard a lot about Will Kasmerick, how much of a selfless player he is on, really an extension of the offensive line. Maybe he's the inline guy, and maybe G. Scott emerges as the receiver, kind of, not Cade Stover-esque, but a guy that can fill in some of that production. I don't know. And then with a Jelani Thurman, I don't know, maybe in the red zone, like we talked about all last summer, maybe they go to that a little bit more where you're not tipping your hand as much. If he's, made enough gains in the blocking department, maybe you throw to him a little bit down there. And maybe it's an element of surprise, right? Because, just as you said, Tim, if it's a little bit overshadowed, that's not the worst thing in the world either. It can be kind of to your advantage if people aren't looking at that. They're looking at Carnell Tate and Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka and all these guys. And, oh, by the way, the 2 running backs, but then there's a tight end who's 6'6", 258 pounds, drifting off open in the end zone right there. So, yeah, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world that maybe they're overshadowed. I think, if anything, it's a window of opportunity for these guys to make a statement. And by the way, Cade Stover, going into his season in 2022, no one thought he'd have more than 10 catches, and he ended up having more than 30 that year. So how much do we really know? And that was a guy that came in, playing tight end and then defensive end and then linebacker and then tight end again. And so with all of these tight ends, you really never know what they're going to do until they get the opportunity. And I think that's maybe the exciting thing about this group is there's so much unknown.
Yeah, I made the comment to a couple of sources at the building, just talking and passing. And I said, if Keenan Bailey, who Cade Stover credits with all of that route running that you saw from Cade Stover the last 2 years, he credits Keenan Bailey with that. I've been telling people if Keenan Bailey can turn a linebacker from Lexington into a 3rd-round draft or a 4th-round draft pick at tight end, I think he's going to be okay with Will Kasmerick and G. Scott and Jelani Thurman and right on down the line, as Tim likes to say. That's the tight end room, though. I don't know, how much else there is to say about this group. There's a lot of unknowns, a lot of moving parts, but a lot of talent. We can't just short shrift the talent. It's there. It just has to come together. We're going to get out of here and break apart instead of coming together. Tim is going to get back to that merchandise tent at Pinehurst number 2 as he is down there for the U.S. Open. Tim, I hope you have a great time. Andy is going to stay here in Columbus and just keep covering those Buckeyes tight ends as well as me, Spencer Holbrook. I'm going to do it as well. I got to give a special shout out to my guy Luke from Dublin, though. I was out at the Memorial last week. Luke from the city of Dublin comes up to me, tells me what a big fan of Lettermen Row he is. If you do that, I promise I will shout you out on the show. If you ever see us, if you see Tim in the merch tent at Pinehurst, if you see Andy at the local coffee shops here in Columbus, or if you see me, Miller. Yeah, Yeah, milling around Target with my wife. We'll make sure to shout out the people who come up to us and talk to us. So for Tim on the other side of that screen, for Andy, I'm just Spencer. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening to the Tight Ends edition of this offseason report at Lettermen Row. We'll see you guys over at lettermenrow.com for all the coverage of the Ohio State tight ends.